I read a really interesting book, um, I think in 2004 or 2005, and it really stayed with me a long time. Um, Eventually, I found another copy of this book after losing it um, as I was undergoing my retreat process. And the statement is quite simple. It said there that um, the electricity in the world was increasing even as the magnetism of the earth was decreasing. And I guess because I was experiencing like so much of this electricity like rising up in my body, this understanding helped me a lot in framing what exactly was happening to myself when I left the world, to find out more about who we are and what is hiding inside of us. Um, so this could be light. Light is basically understood as an electromagnetic wave, like turning into each other. And coming from this very, very simple image of light, um, I had um, took a small section of an infinite wave, and in the inner dance processes, drawing this to myself and others. Let's use colors. Um, I basically stayed with a sacred geometrical symbol called the Vesica Piscis over a long period of time, sharing this with people in places like India, in Singapore, in America, um, in Taiwan, in Indonesia, in Palawan. So people could look at um, the inner dance process in the simplest possible way. And I feel this is maybe where we could start too. So this image is called the Vesica Piscis. And the Vesica Piscis is basically the place in which two circles meet. It's that shared space whereby there are aspects of a being that might be specific to that being, and then there are aspects of this other being that's very novel and unique to that being. So the Vesica Piscis might be this shared space, and just notice the fact that it's shaped like the human eye, and it's shaped like the leaf, the two parts of the human and the person that absorbs like light. So it's almost like we're being called to look at um, light. Um, it looks like the pineal gland, and it's also the Mayan glyph for zero. Um, so one way we could look at this is a representation of how maybe just like what's happening in the earth, um, electricity and magnetism are two aspects of one helix. Electricity could be understood as something that rises in the body. A lot of people use the word kundalini nowadays to borrow a Hindu or Indian tradition way of describing the feminine that arises from the base of the spine. And magnetism could be very well be mind. Magnetism being the force that kind of holds things together. Electricity does quite the opposite. It spreads things apart. Magnetism, like gravity, holds things down. It also contracts. It makes things tight. Electricity, um, yeah, electricity, I guess, is about that which brings liberation and freedom. And we're coming to know it, like somehow. So, whatever tool, whatever event brings about an energetic descent, somehow also spontaneously allows for an ascent or something that rises. Um, Primarily, we're understanding that there are ways to position the body in the horizontal position when we lay down that allows this to happen. When we close our eyes, magnetism can drop. When we lay down and go to sleep or relax, go into the shavasana position, magnetism goes down. And we're realizing that as that takes place, electricity can also rise. Um, so, in that sense, it's almost saying that we're too vertical. There's something in the human that stood up and became the bipedal mammal that started to think and started to perceive things from a hierarchical, vertical, higher place. And it's almost like we had to give up certain earthbound, intuitive ways of understanding the world. So it's almost like a part needs to drop down for something to rise up. Um, Many people feel in the energy process that the goal is to reduce magnetism to zero as much as possible, and it's to raise up intuition or the energy of the feminine as high as possible. Um, I feel this is important to point out because that could lead to problems. Magnetism or the masculine energy holds form, holds structure intact, and without which everything just flows, you know. We could understand magnetism to be that which is form. So, form could be what is in opposition of flow. And when you're going to be in pure flow, there will be no form. And I've seen many people go into this considerably deep to the point where they don't know their name, they can't speak, they move around the earth without really thinking about themselves anymore. They go into unsafe areas of their lives, maybe because they are asking to let go of everything that is binding them. So we almost would be interested in what would be the meeting point, what would be the point of balance in which magnetism and electricity kind of meet. That somehow we don't need to go into the extreme polarizations of flow and form. Somehow they would find some sort of integration process that we readily would deserve. Now, for a while, I used this image to help people understand like certain ways in which music can bring about like an energy descent or a process of releasing, making things go down, bringing people into surrender. And there are certain ways of conducting music that allows an energy to rise up, an energy we've been hiding within ourselves. Shakti energy, Kuan Yin energy, the divine feminine energy rests here. Um, Music and the body position would be just two things that we would put out there to help us understand how the Vesica Piscis awakens in all of us. Language holds a part, being able to contextualize things in language in a way that helps people to surrender. That's one important thing. So those are just three. There are many, many things that we can talk about that asks the question, like, what is it that we can facilitate that allows people to undergo a descent process. Now, on a scientific level, this figure doesn't have to just stay within sacred geometry. Eventually, I started to note that this actually looks at the autonomic nervous system, the ANS, just as much. So the autonomic nervous system is the part of the peripheral nervous system that spreads out across the whole body, that regulates the things in your systems that you normally have no control over. Autonomy being a word that describes that which is automatic, that which has its own intelligence, that doesn't need your willful, conscious self-regulation um, to keep going, because it would be quite tiring to try to control, let's say, your heartbeat, or to control your breathing patterns, or to control your own brain. There are many other things that you don't control, such as your endocrine system you don't control. You don't really consciously control your digestion process. So there's a system inside of us that in fact goes into a helical maintenance, allowing for magnetism and electricity and all of its representations to go into like an inhale and an exhale, a palpitation between um, the beating of the blood, and also a shifting between the slower and the faster brainwave activities that um, happen because of day and night. There are certain times of the day when something needs to drop and then something needs to rise up. So this is very, very much part of us. We are dual in nature, always coming together in unity. According to the ANS, one way of understanding magnetism and electricity would be in relation to the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. So the sympathetic would normally be called fight or flight or freeze. And the parasympathetic nervous system might be called rest and digest. And let's just put trust there because it's so significant in the inner dance process. So all organisms that have a heart that deals with air and deals with electricity basically have an autonomic nervous system. We need the autonomic nervous system to regulate and to control that which we cannot basically control because it's just too complex to regulate all of these dualities that take place. Sometimes we're in danger a long time ago, and sometimes we can trust that maybe like a tiger or a leopard won't eat us, and we can rest. Another way of looking at this is actually like seasonality, that there are certain times of the year in some places where it's easier to get food and there's less danger of freezing from the cold. And there are certain moments where we hibernate. We need to store more resources away so that we don't go hungry. So yeah, basically the work that we do has much to understand in regards to these two motions. Human beings, like many animals, have focused so much on fighting or running away or getting paralyzed by um, the dangers in the world that we inhabit. But we need to accord a specific time of the day and of the year to rest and to process and digest and to feel like we don't have to keep fighting, that we can trust. Um, so it's very, very important for people to realize that um, we are, in fact, bringing into consciousness what has been unconscious over a long period of time. Autonomy means you have no control. In the energy work, we realize that we actually have control. The SNS is very much the part of us that's reactive, um, based on what's happening around you. Um, your heart palpitates, your breathing patterns change, and then your brain gets wired all of a sudden because of what you hear or even what you ingest. Let's say if you have coffee, um, the sympathetic nervous system would rise up. And let's say when you do something that slows you down, something that relaxes you, something goes down. I would say that the PSNS or the parasympathetic nervous system might even hide our creative potencies. So there are certain ways of understanding these waves that when you relax, when you open up, when you slow things down, something very creative can arise and come up that normally is being blocked by our reactive tendencies. Basically, the sympathetic nervous system closes the system. It could even be understood on a cellular level. Scientists have realized that when we go into fight and flight and freeze response, the cell actually closes, the cell wall closes. Um, and then we get sick. We undergo these debilitating disease patterns that become very hard to heal. And healing takes place when we learn to open the cell, open um, the gating mechanisms of the heart, the brain, our breathing patterns, our digestive systems. So when we tap into the parasympathetic nervous system, somehow a system that's very controlling, very controlling, very reactive, very dense. Um, we start to balance things out. The point is not to actually get rid of this. The thing is, fear doesn't have to be a negative thing. Fear can be a friend. When we marry the sympathetic nervous system with the parasympathetic nervous system, fear just becomes an energy. And there's a way the body could hold that openness through relaxation, where energy that used to be fear just like flows through us. Um, so, in effect, another way of understanding this integrative, like unitive point where both systems meet is to just keep it flowing, just become both. Um, how do we shift from autonomy to consciousness, where everything just actually just flows, even as it's allowed to hold form. Form can come into flow, and it feels like we just became so form based. So, in fact, many human beings who are very much in control don't really look like a helix anymore. It's almost like human society has um, inverted electricity and magnetism. And so maybe if magnetism became higher than electricity, then we just really look like these two lines, not wanting to meet anymore in any middle place. Magnetism just wants to stay up here, and electricity wants to stay down here. And the only time people actually experience this helical structure is when we go to sleep and go into REM states, when we go to the spiritual awakening, when we go into yoga, when we go into spiritual disciplines, when people take psychedelics. Um, there are these rare meeting points that come up until people go back to their lives and still just become these two lines still. So based on this model, there's so much that we can talk about that reveals other boards or images that could explain why do we use the music the way we do? Why do we hold bodies the way we hold them? Why do we speak to the people the way we do? What is it that we can use that could allow for a descent and then a reascent? It's almost like something needs to go up again after it goes down, and something needs to go down again after it goes up. So rather than just making energy the point, um, what could signify, let's say, a release of emotions? People cry, people scream, people shout. Um, the awakening could just be happening right here, in fact. And as an illumination starts to take place, what used to be emotions starts to shift into information. You know, at this stage, there are inner dances that aren't just about becoming energy and just emoting, releasing what has been trapped, like up here. At this state, um, like the eye literally opens and visions, visions will appear. So, I guess a huge um, journey we're having together is how do we get from here to there, to this point? Um, what I sometimes like to do is to reverse this, in fact. And for me, what this looks like is the journey not from adulthood into oneness. This is basically where we were when we were when we were babies. To the baby, like everything was one, and somehow we needed to dichotomize. We had to create a duality. We had to train ourselves to become separate, where in fact we simply used to be just one.